Hi there, it's Belle in the Sky News studio. Well, there's only one story we can talk about. The images are grim. The stories we're reading and hearing are grim. Palestinian officials say at least 500 people were killed in the explosion at Al Ahli hospital in Gaza. One of the biggest challenges is the information war. Claim and counterclaim about what happened with that explosion. The president of the Palestinian National Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, blames Israel. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blamed the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group. The Prime Minister's team says it's Hamas's little brother. And then the words of President Joe Biden on his visit to Israel today.
It appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I truly grieve for the families.
So, one blast at a hospital, two narratives of how it happened, hundreds of civilians caught in the crosshairs. On this episode of the Sky News Daily, owning the narrative of the Al Ahli hospital explosion. In the aftermath, the search for answers. And again on the Daily, we've got our Middle East correspondent, Ali Bunkall, who's now in Tel Aviv. First of all, I'd like to ask you what it's like to be a journalist in the region at a moment like this, where you are essentially trying to make head or tail, trying to verify what is right now as good as unverifiable.
It's very, very hard. The Israel-Palestine conflict is many decades old, and it is incredibly polarized. And you have to try and tread a delicate, balanced line between the two sides. Now, when an event like that happened last night, a lot of news comes in very, very quickly, and it is coming in from somewhere where we cannot get access to. Now, Sky News, like some other media organizations, we do have colleagues operating in Gaza, but such is the situation on the ground at the moment, they were somewhere else in the Gaza Strip. So you're receiving a lot of detail and information and an awful lot of mobile phone video that has been filmed on the ground and is being distributed around the social media networks, the WhatsApp groups, for example, around here. You have to start reporting the news very quickly because it is evident that something has happened. The question is, what has happened, what is the extent of what has happened, and who might be to blame? And that's where it gets a lot trickier. Whatever I say on air, on Twitter, online, take it from me, there will be many people on either side who disagree. My golden rule that normally works pretty well, not always, is that if you stick to the facts, then that's a good starting point. If you are quoting one side or the other, just contextualize it. So if you're talking about the health ministry in Gaza, then it's a Hamas-run health ministry. So you just need to bring that caveat in that the figures we are quoting to you of the estimated number of dead is coming from a health ministry run by Hamas, who are one of the protagonists in this conflict. If you're getting a statement from the IDF, you might want to caveat it by saying, they refute the claims. However, we are yet to see their evidence of that. I live in Jerusalem, I cover the Middle East. If the IDF are saying it could be a failed rocket launch by one of the militant groups, I can very comfortably say that failed rocket launches are something that happens out of the Gaza Strip with reasonable regularity. That's not to say it happened in this case, or it did or didn't happen. That's where I might be able to add something a bit extra.
What do you think our listeners should be aware of when they are scrolling through Instagram, scrolling through Twitter at moments like this?
Any conflict between Israel and the Palestinians draws in a lot of emotion on both sides. At the moment, the Israeli public and supporters of Israel are quite understandably angry and in shock at what happened almost 2 weeks ago here. The Palestinians believe, regardless of whether they justify what happened or not, more broadly, they believe that they have a right to be angry, having lived under many years of Israeli occupation. And so the two sides, the starting point is that the two sides are well apart. And people have very entrenched opinions about who is in the right and who is in the wrong. If you are looking at the news on social media, you are often looking at people who are not verified journalists. They're not working for reputable journalistic outlets, and they might be expressing opinion rather than putting the fact out there. They might be manipulating articles that we and others write. So, for example, they might be taking a screenshot of a headline which doesn't give you the body of writing that would add context and caveat. You have to be very careful who is saying what. Who are they? Do they have an agenda? Are they on a particular side? Where have they got their information from? Is it verified? Is it checked? Does it have a basis in fact? I mean, not just for this story, but for any story. But when it comes to this story, conflicts between Israelis and Palestinians, it is particularly profound.
At a moment like this, hundreds of people killed in an attack on a hospital. How do you think this will change what's happening in this war?
I think what happened could be a turning point. We will just have to wait and see. Whatever the Israelis say, there will be most of the Arab world will just not believe them. That's the bottom line. It is very important that whether in the short term or the long term, what happened and how hundreds of civilians died is established beyond doubt. But in terms of the immediate future for this conflict, there will be people on both sides who just have a firm view and they're not willing to listen to the counter view. And that is why we saw in the West Bank last night, in Jordan and in Beirut, protests on the streets. That is why the tensions here have risen yet another notch, if that was even possible, because many in the Arab world will sympathize with what Palestinian civilians are now living through in Gaza. They will hate the Israelis for it. I know it's a strong word, but that is how they will feel. And they will not be in a mood to listen to Israeli justifications, Israeli excuses, Israeli facts. They will have already made up their opinion. The Israelis know that, and the Western world knows that, and that is why they are taking this so seriously.
And they really are taking it seriously. The US president isn't just on the phone, he's actually gone to Israel. His Secretary of State's also there after a whistle-stop diplomatic trip through Israel's neighbours and Gulf states. Meanwhile, across the Arab world, protests have erupted against Israel. Across Israel's northern border, there are concerns that Lebanon's Hezbollah, across the theological divide with Hamas, but sharing financial backing from Iran, could be brought into the conflict. Arab leaders cancelled a planned summit with Biden after the explosion. This region is used to simmering, but now it feels closer to boiling point. How dangerous really is this moment? General Sir Simon Mails, a retired British Army officer, he used to advise the Ministry of Defence on the Middle East. Simon, how do you think it might bring in other actors in the region?
It can certainly be used by the Quds Force of the Iranian Republican Guard Corps to catalyse action on Israel's northern border with Hezbollah. It makes it very, very difficult for Gulf states whose leadership are very keen really to normalise relationships with Israel, not to be aware of the effect on what is cavalierly known as the Arab Street. It will be used undoubtedly very aggressively by the Palestinians. I think because of the nature of the Israeli state, which is a democracy, has great scrutiny, the position of Netanyahu, I cannot imagine that the Israelis would have done this and then try to cover it up. There are too many ways that would get out and really damage their cause. But I certainly expect Hamas and Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, etc., to use it as part of their narrative to try and seize the moral high ground on the basis of widening this from an Israeli-Hamas issue to an Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Arab issue.
And who would that benefit?
Iran, certainly. Russia, certainly. China, certainly. Syria, any number of people who have their grudges, their grievances, their desires to use turmoil in the Middle East to further wider agendas.
It's interesting because we have seen, before all of this, we saw small steps towards normalisation of relations between Israel and some of its Arab neighbours or sort of within the region, particularly I'm thinking of sort of Saudi and so on. Do you think this already now is a death knell to any of those small steps?
I would hope not a death knell, but a lot does depend on how the situation plays out from here, Belle. The Abrahamic Accords, which were a great triumph for Trump, not that he'll be given much credit for it in America in the current climate, but getting UAE, getting Bahrain, getting Morocco, getting Jordan and Egypt were in the tent. And there was at least a prospect that Saudi Arabia, having to an extent parked an ideological conflict with Iran, might have been able to see its way to some form of normalization between a wider deal. But I think for the moment that is very difficult.
What we've had since last night is the president of the Palestinian National Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, saying that he's cancelling a planned meeting with US President Joe Biden over that attack on the Al Ahli hospital. The King of Jordan, Abdullah II, exactly, also pulling out of those meetings because they can't be seen to be in the room with someone who is so openly in their words, pro-Israeli. And yet, certainly for Mahmoud Abbas, his people have just suffered an enormous loss. Would there not be a power in walking in there as the leader of a people who have just suffered in 2 minutes hundreds and hundreds of deaths, and the power that would come with that as an opening hand? I would absolutely argue you're absolutely right, Belle. And
if people are genuinely concerned to dial down this violence, and let's remember where I won't say where it started, but the most recent attack. And it's one thing to attack the state of Israel and the Israeli Defense Force and the, Mossad or whatever, but we know the reality of who was killed in those terrorist attacks. But equally, one would have hoped that somebody like Mahmoud Abbas could say, "I'm going to seize leadership here, and I'm going to go in there with a very strong case on behalf of the Palestinian people. Because let's drive a peace agenda forward, not let's let the engines of war start up again." But his position is so weak, really. I can only hope that officials on all sides are continuing to talk, because it's in nobody's not in nobody's interest. It is in nobody's interest, people of goodwill, for this to spiral further out of control. But there's going to be some very, very dark headlines, I think, over the next few days, weeks, months.
We've had our correspondent in Beirut and reporting on the situation in Lebanon. There is a sort of fear, perhaps, for those in Lebanon that they don't feel they've been as close to getting involved in the conflict since 2006. Do you think that Iran-backed Hezbollah would get involved, given that in 2006 they were bruised, they were damaged by this? Would Iran want to encourage Hezbollah to get involved in this at this point?
This is the big, big question. How much is in Iran's interest to spread this conflict? The Israelis have already bombed airfields in Aleppo and Damascus, linked to weapons supplies to Hezbollah. Hezbollah are probably of an order of magnitude better equipped, better trained, more experienced because of their actions in Syria than Hamas. And the Israeli Defense Force is quite widely spread, gathering enough combat power to go into Gaza. And we don't quite know, where on the spectrum any Israeli offensive will stand, while being able to control a possible intifada in the West Bank, while being able to face down Hezbollah, is a hell of a challenge. So much is interconnected and so much is coming at a really bad time globally.
I want to ask you, I wonder whether you think that Israel more broadly has put the US in quite a difficult position now, because Biden is having to calibrate his language very carefully whilst watching what Israel is doing on the ground to those people in Gaza. Is that an awkward position to put your ally in?
I think it's always awkward for the Americans. It's an absolute pillar of American foreign policy that they support the Israelis through thick and thin. Hence, going back to our earlier discussion, Belle, about the significance of the explosion at this hospital in Gaza, because keeping the, inverted commas, moral high ground, control of the narrative, is, of course, vitally important for the Israelis and for those supporters of Israel who, of course, always, inevitably do find themselves in a complicated position when challenged by the media, opposition, politicians, people around the world. So I can only assume the fact that Biden's come out so strongly, as I understand, to take the Israeli position on who is responsible for that explosion means that he has confidence in his own intelligence experts and the assurances of the Israelis that this has been an awful, awful accident. I'm not saying deliberately by Hamas or Islamic Jihad, but just an awful accident of which, wounded people, doctors, nurses, women, children are going to have been the victims. Awful human tragedy.
Keeping the moral high ground, controlling the narrative. That was General Sir Simon Mail reiterating the notion that the fight for territory here is so much more than that. On the last episode of The Daily, you might remember Sally was speaking to a hostage negotiator about how these sorts of events unfold. Well, one of the 199 Israeli hostages thought to be being held by Hamas since the 7th of October is Omri Miran. I spoke to his wife, Lishay. We started on the morning of that attack. We come to Saturday, the 7th of October. You were awoken early in the morning by a siren that you've heard before. What did you think was happening?
It started at 6 in the morning. My little daughter, Ronnie, 2 years old, she's sleeping normally at a safe room. This is her room. Me, Omri, and Alma, the baby, 6 months, we slept on our bedroom. When we heard the siren, we took Alma and go over there to be with Ronnie in the safe room. We locked the door and we sit over there. It was a really a lot of missiles. And we think, okay, we understand it's not a small thing. It's something really big. We start to get a WhatsApp message from other people in the kibbutz that say that the Hamas is in here, the Hamas is in our house, there is a lot of shooting. And we understand that we need to be in quiet and stay at the safe room. We heard the shooting near to us, start here screaming and yelling. The Hamas speak and yell and shooting into our house, and they broke up the windows in our bathroom. They start, trash everywhere and yelling to us, open the door, and knock with the guns on our door for the safe room.
Yeah, so they knew where you were.
Yes, they knew that we are in the safe room. We try to be really quiet, but Alma, it's 6 months. It's not something you can do. And after a few minutes, we heard the Tomer Elias.
This is your neighbor, am I right? This is your teenage.
Yes, the neighbor kids. He was 17 years old, and he started to talk with us and in Hebrew and tell us, please open the door. Because if you don't open the door, they will shoot me and shoot you. We opened the door and they took us to our kitchen. We sit on the floor. Ronnie is on the bed now in the other room. So I really begged that they give me to take her.
I want to try and understand there what happened. Of course, your toddler daughter is in another room at this point. You've all been taken to the kitchen. How does Ronnie get woken up and how does she get brought to you?
Ronnie was sleeping, and when she woke up with guns point of her.
Tom is the 17-year-old neighbor who you say now is dead.
He's dead. Yeah, he was murdered.
Did you see him being killed?
No, it was after we see him. At the moment we sit on the kitchen on our house. And the Hamas, they want to find our weapon. We don't have a weapon, but they was sure that we have a weapon in our house. And when they understand we don't have a weapon, they took us to another family near to us. And then we see over there the father, the mother, and 2 children. They sit on the floor of the kitchen. There is a lot of glasses all over. And when we sit near to them, we understand that the oldest daughter, Mayan, 18 years old, murdered also. And she's her body lying in the safe room. They kill her.
So your 2 daughters aged 2 and 6 months saw this body?
They didn't saw the body, but we know it's over there. My little girl, Ronnie, 2 years old, she saw a lot of violence, a lot of evil, a lot of guns, all the time heard shooting outside. And we have an RPG in front of us. We sat together, the two family, after we understand that they film us on live Facebook. They told us all the time that they don't want us, they want the soldier. They're not like Israeli IDF, and everything's going to be okay if we stay and quiet. They start to organize all their stuff and told my Omri, my man, and Tzachi Dan, the father of the other family, to get up. They locked up in the hand,
They tied their hands behind their backs, is what you're showing.
Yes. And I told to Omri, I just told him that I love him, that he's, I'm sorry, just a second.
Take your time.
I told him that I love him, that I'm waiting for him, and I look up for our daughters. And I told them also, don't be a hero. Do what they want.
And that was the last time you saw your husband?
Yes. They told us before they go, they told us, don't worry, they will be back.
Since Omri was taken, I guess,
We know
who have you been able to contact?
We know that Omri now, it's most likely been abducted by Hamas to the Gaza Strip. This is the situation now. And this is what I heard.
How are the nights for you? How are you finding sleeping?
I don't really sleep. I don't have my Omri, I don't have my husband, I don't have my man. And the world need to do everything, all the world, to help us bring them home, to help us, to help me bring my Omri home, to me, to the daughters.
That was Lishay. She's staying with friends now in a different part of Israel. Her parents are with her, and of course her two little daughters, just 2 years old and 6 months. They're still waiting for news of Omri. We'll keep checking in on Lishay, but for now, that's it from us. Take care of yourselves. Bye.